Greetings, welcome to the DragonCon Urban Fantasy Track author interview series. Today I am joined by the wonderful and lovely Faith Hunter, who is going to answer some questions for me, and I'm thrilled to have her here. Thank you so much, Faith, for agreeing to do this. I know that a lot of your readers are going to be very excited, and I'm sure you'll pick up some new ones as we go along.
But thank you so much for inviting me, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you.
Fans.
There you go. There you go. And we hope that we get to see them in person. But in the meantime, I mean, in the future, but in the meantime, this is a way to give some folks a way to connect. And, we will have this for posterity. It will appear on the YouTube channel. It'll be there for, time immemorial. And well, who knows, maybe 50 years from now, someone will unearth it. So my first question, and this is pretty much the same one that I ask everyone that I have been doing interviews with, and that is, did you read fantasy and science fiction as a child or as a young adult? Did you get started that early?
Oh, yeah, I really did. I remember going into Walden Books that many years ago. There are no more. Haven't been in decades. But I remember going when our mall, of course, there aren't very many of those left either, but I remember going into the mall and discovering Walden Books and just feeling like I was in heaven. And I found Anne McCaffrey.
Ah, okay.
In love with Anne McCaffrey, and would keep a list of her books, and I would go in and I would hunt for her books and go through everything on the shelf and compare this with, do I have this one? And because I was babysitting. That's the way I was making my money as a kid. So I had to spend that money very wisely. And what the library didn't have, I would go buy, and what wasn't available. Finally, one very sweet person behind the counter said, "You do know that we can special order books for you, right?" And I went, "Oh!"
And that was kind of the beginning of the end, right? Yeah.
My whole world was upended, and the list was like, long as my arm, and I had to do a whole lot more babysitting to pay for that. But yes, she was my introduction. She was not the last. And I still read fantasy and sci-fi a lot. And don't ask me who, because I will go completely blank, but I do still read it.
Well, that's usually the same, it's not the same author, but that's typically the same answer that I seem to get from most authors in the genre did actually have an early interest. And I always enjoy hearing what were the particular works that got you, the most interested from the very beginning. Excuse me, we were talking about pollen earlier. I think I just got it. This is what I get.
We'll both just apologize right now. The pollen
That's right.
Horrific today, and I'm sipping tea, and we're both just going to hack a little bit, and y'all just bear with us because it's on my back porch. It has rolled into long noodles of pollen. It's horrible.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I don't think
I vacuumed it 2 days ago. So it's bad today.
A plot point that could show up at Nell's series, and excuse me. Okay. Well, you never know, right? Now, you started out as a suspense writer, and actually when I met you many years ago at a library conference at the book selling segment of that conference, I picked up. It was GLA, the Georgia Library Association, yeah. Okay. And then they changed. They kind of combined after the first couple of years that I went. They combined with the Media Association, and I forget what it could have been kind of a combination acronym at that point, but in any case, you know, you had we have this one. Let's see, we have this series, and we have this series, and then we have the standalone. And
Yeah,
I had those are just
I
a few.
think there were four standalone.
Yes, well, I pulled a few of those out, but what what my question is that, you know, it's obvious that to you, you still, that this is still an important aspect of your work, because all of it, you know, even though you're not writing more or less, you know, straight up suspense now, there's definitely an aspect of that in your work. And I'm curious what kind of drew you to that genre in the first place.
I always liked problem solving.
Mm.
It was the format of a mystery is a problem presents itself and someone or someone's solve the problem. So you stumble, the most obvious is you stumble across a dead body in the woods and you're a baker and now you're going to solve the mystery. Who killed, you know, Joe Schmo down the street and dumped his body in the woods? So that format of smart thinking and out of the box reasoning is was intriguing to me from the time I was a very young reader. And I mean, Nancy Drew, for instance, loved
Ah,
Nancy. So, and that was before I had a Walden Books. That was library time. Um, so there was Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, and the solving of the problem was always fascinating to me. And who done it, and which bad guy, and how do you catch the bad person? So that was always of great fascination to me. And when I started writing, my first two books were as Gary Hunter, written with a former undercover cop, Gary Leveley, and he and I wrote two novels that were police procedurals. And at the time, while I could write really, really well, my plotting was less than stellar. So from him, I learned to plot. And from me, he became a better writer. So we worked together. It took us about 5 years to write our first book, which is sad. By today's standards, that was awful. But we had to learn to write together, and we had to learn um, how to take what we had done and make it polished and make it clean, because it was really hard to find help back then. This was back in the 80s. So Gary and I worked together, and I learned about plotting. I learned about how the linear process is for what I had been reading all those years. I learned how to actually do it, so that when Gary and I parted ways, I was able to take that directly to my own work and publish as Gwen Hunter, so that I was able to have a solo career. And that was a lot of that was because of the things I learned from Gary. So the answer, that's the long answer, and the short answer is I always want to know who done it, and then make sure the bad guy gets it.
right. There you go. And something that kind of strikes me too, though, is in the Deland books and in a couple of your standalones, you do have a little hint of, what do you want to say, the paranormal, supernatural, fantasy elements kind of blended in. So it kind of it gives people an inkling of, you know, it seems as though it's kind of a natural progression that you moved on to something that was more of a fantasy science fiction nature, such as the Rogue Mage series. Now, for those people who may be unfamiliar with what the Rogue Mage series is all about, can you give us a brief, you know, give us a pitch for the series, if you will, so that people will know what it's all about?
105 years after the end of the world, Thorn discovers that her ex-husband has been kidnapped. Finding out who he is, where he is, and who took him will expose her deepest secret, which is that she is a mage in hiding.
Ta-da! And,
And I built a post-apocalyptic world where a very small percentage of people who had been hit with 3 different pandemics in a row, of course.
of course, yeah.
Probably shouldn't have even said that word. Let's see, where there were 3 late unpleasantnesses in a row. The women who were pregnant during all 3 and who survived, their children were born with the ability to do magic. To use leftover creation energy, meaning they could use quantum mechanic energy to do a whole lot more stuff than an ordinary human could.
There you have it, folks. If you're unfamiliar with that particular series and you like that kind of thing, I can guarantee that it's a wild ride and you will enjoy it. So, yes, and I'm kind of aggravated at myself that my copies of that are on a shelf across the room, and I didn't want to get up and go over there and bring. But yes, they are there on my shelf as well.
Well,
So
my editor at the time described it as X-Men meets the Left Behind series without God.
that's perfect, actually. That's a very succinct and apt description. So yes. Now your next step is moving towards what probably you have picked up the most readers from, because the wonderful series has been going on for a while. And we've got the Jane Yellowrock series with the Skinwalker as the first volume. And yes, what was it that kind of had you go in that direction? I mean, that towards urban fantasy as opposed to, the Rogue Mage series has elements of urban fantasy, but it's not what someone would classify as urban fantasy. So
I agree.
what was the move toward going towards urban fantasy? What does that stem from?
That let me pull together all of the things that I loved at the time. I had my fantasy and my paranormal creatures, and I had my mystery, and I had my detective / vampire hunter / problem solver / badass biker chick. And I was able to bring all of those fun elements together into one, what was going to be a trilogy at the time.
Well, and I know I speak for everyone when I say that I'm glad that it got way out of hand. It did not remain a trilogy. So,
yeah, I am currently revising book 15 of the Yellowrock series, and I have one more under contract in the Soulwood series, which is an offshoot of the Jane Yellowrock series. So yeah, that's a lot of books. When you pass 20 altogether in one world, you either really love it or you really hate it, or both.
Right, depending on the day, right?
Yeah.
Which one? Now, back in the day, I used to be a book reviewer, and I actually had a portion of what I said about Skinwalker is that it's steeped in a heady combination of action, philosophical reflection, Indian lore, and mysticism. Skinwalker delivers on each level. And I mean, seriously, that's what I thought. If I didn't think it, I wouldn't have written it. But to me, that was, it's also kind of a further piece of what you're talking about in terms of being able to blend all those elements. Now, again, it's, at this point in time, it's probably very difficult to imagine that anyone watching this interview would not know anything about the Jane Yellowrock series, but can you give us a little bit of a pitch on that one, please?
Let's see. Jane Yellowrock has never met a sane vampire. As a rogue vampire hunter, she has only tracked and killed those who killed, and drained humankind. When she goes to New Orleans, however, to take a job tracking down a vampire who has turned against his own and begun draining those so-called sane vampires, she finally meets one of the Mithrans, Leo Pellissier, of the master of the city of New Orleans, and his right-hand woman, Katie Fontenot. And from there, Jane learns all kinds of lessons, including who she is and who vampires really are.
All right, folks, there you go. So again, if there's anyone who is unfamiliar with the series, they'll be getting on board right now. I can tell they're looking things up as we speak. Now, you mentioned the Soulwood series, and I do want to talk about kind of both of them. But when Nell appears in the short story Off the Grid, which comes in between books 7 and 8 in the series.
You know that. I don't even know that. I don't even know where she came in.
Well, and the story's Off the Grid, which kind of fits, considering that title fits perfectly what Nell's situation was at the time. Now, my question is, did you know at the time that you were writing that story, did you really think, I'd really like to do something else with this character? Or did it happen? Did those thoughts and the whole idea kind of transpire afterwards?
I tend to write short stories with the thought of, is there any depth to this character? That question is always in the back of my mind. And if there's depth to the character, I can create plot lines that will that the character can move through and grow through, because there's nothing more boring than a character who doesn't develop. So the depth of the character is the most important thing in terms of how I view the potential of taking a character from a short story or a novella to a novel length or more series. When I wrote the Nell short story, it was really just to write a short story. That was the intent. But just because that is the stated goal does not mean that I'm not always looking for something else. For instance, I wrote a short story, well, it was a novella, about Eli and Liz Everhart, Eli Younger and Liz Everhart, that was in Dirty Deeds 1. And as I'm writing it, I'm having so much fun. I'm thinking, I could do a couple of more of these novellas or novels. But by the time I was done, I was really well aware that what I had was maybe one more novella in that. It was not something I was going to be able to present to an editor or consider doing independently. There's just not enough emotional depth in the couple to that work. I'm not, and I do have one more short story to write. I was contracted verbally, a handshake deal that I would do another short story for Dirty Deeds 2 if we hit USA Today with Dirty Deeds 1. And of course, we hit USA Today with Dirty Deeds 1.
Yay, good job.
That's kind of cool. So I am very, I've already started the short story that will go in there, and then another short story that is I've started playing with right now, that is an old group of codgers go to magic school. They're 70s, they're in their 70s, and their powers descended on them late, and they go to magic school and they solve the mystery.
Oh, well, now that sounds amazing.
I love it. I'm having so much fun with it, but I have to admit that as I've written this one, and I don't have an outline, it's just a bare bones concept, and because it's a short story, I can play with it any way I want. I'm now 16 pages into it, and I've rewritten the point of view 3 times, so I'm not sure where I'm going. not sure where I'm going with this one. I started out in first person and singular, and now I'm in third person multiple. And I'm still not sure if I'm not going to go back and redo the whole thing again with all of the new storylines I've added in, back to first person singular. I don't know what I'm doing with it, but I'm having fun. And
Well,
it's doing these new things, these short stories, like Off the Grid that spawned Nell, does something to free up the mind. It's not necessarily something under contract. I haven't had to present an outline or proposal. It's just write us a short story. Okay, I'll write you a short story. So that's where I am now. And I'm writing short stories and revising book 15, and it's a hot mess. So an Untitled, Jane Yellowrock number 15, but it is, I can already tell that this book, which may very well be the last Jane Yellowrock novel, I don't see how I can do anything else with her, is doing so far everything I wanted it to do. It's tying all those wonderful loose ends together that were kind of flapping in the wind of all of the other books. And I'm having fun with it. It's kind of like a literary version of a pollen noodle. Oh,
right.
honestly.
And you can do it if you're on your porch. So there you go,
There
right?
you go.
Well, and I would imagine that that is what you were talking about, kind of experimenting, going through with this other short story. It probably gives you a chance to do something different. And it's kind of like, the way to solve a problem sometimes is to not think about it. So you're off doing something else, and then it might occur to you, oh, now I need to go back and do this. So I would imagine that could possibly work that way on occasion. And
That is exactly how Junkyard Cats got started. I was asked, I think it could have been 2016. I'm not sure. It was when Audible first started doing their Audible originals. Before they even there was such a thing, they contacted my agent and said, would Faith be interested in doing something for us? It doesn't have to be in the Jane Yellowrock world. It doesn't have to be, they really made it very appealing to me.
Mhm.
I told my agent at the time, I can't even begin to think of this right now. There's too much going on. But between books, I suddenly sat down one day and just started writing, and Junkyard Cats and Shining Smith just sort of came out of nowhere. And it was sci-fi. It had nothing paranormal when it started out. And I don't think that having psychic cats counts as paranormal. So, not so it just came out of truly nowhere. And I had to find physicists to help me with the right terminology. And I had to have an editor to make sure that this sort of made sense. And when I was about halfway finished, I sent it to my agent and I said, there was somebody somewhere, and I don't remember who, but somebody somewhere said they wanted a novella original. What do you think about this? And before I could pretty much get the words off the paper, she was saying, I'm reading it right now. I love it. I'm going to contact your editor at Audible. And pretty quickly we had an offer on the table for an Audible original, and now I'm a sci-fi writer.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and we will come back to Junkyard Cats in a little bit. But that's a very interesting progression of how you got involved with that. That's something else.
Something totally out of my genre always is very freeing to my mind. And Junkyard Cats was, to me, a natural progression. It took me, it's still a thriller. So I that element of my history and my preferences, but it's a very different kind of novel. novella, excuse me.
Yeah, it's certainly a different, a different feel to that world. But I want to go back to Soulwood.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. We can go where things take us, but I just want to make sure we don't get too far away from her. And so we've got the first book in the series here. That when you did end up, going forward with the Soulwood series about Nell, can you? I mean that it's great. Can you give us kind of your little pitch on that one, on that series?
Nell Nicholson Ingram, formerly tied to a polygamous church in the Tennessee Hills, has made her way to freedom, but it's an uneasy freedom, with the churchmen wanting her land and her back under their thumb. When she comes into contact with Jane Yellowrock, a vampire killer, and goes and offers her services as liaison, she is suddenly thrust into a much more violent world than she expected. And now, what will Nell do with her newfound knowledge of the world outside her church and outside her safety zone? Will she become a consultant for the Psychometric Law Enforcement Division of Homeland Security, or will she be thrust back into the world of the church?
There we go. There we go. Yes, and Nell is, a certainly a very different character than Jane, and I have some questions about that in a moment. But one of the things I did want to ask you is what who are some of your favorite of the secondary or recurring characters to write in either of the Yellowrock or Soulwood series, or anything else actually? But since those are the two most active right now, do you have people that you particularly enjoy writing their stories?
I loved writing Rick LaFleur's story because he is he has so many elements of the anti-hero to him.
Team Rick right here. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
reading about Rick as well.
I wanted to do a novel about Rick, and my publisher turned me down. And so Rick became a recurring character in both the Jane Yellowrock and the Soulwood series, and he's a very strong secondary character in the Soulwood series.
Oh yeah.
So I love writing from his point of view because his progression from a player, misogynist character to someone who has been forced into a were creature and has become an adult. He's grown up. He's paying the price for his mistakes, and he is really a very deep character, and getting into his head has always been fun, especially when I'm getting into his head through Nell, who comes from a polygamous society where men are always abusing, to one extent or another, the females in their church. So he has always been a driving force to me in both the Jane series and the Nell series. I also have fallen in love with, and I don't know how Christine Havum says it. It's the way that I think it's pronounced in Cherokee is Oyotas, Firewind, who is Jane's, turns out to be, all kind of spoilers, I'm sorry, who turns out Jane's bio brother that she has not seen in 170 years. So, in fact, she never met him before. I take that back. She never met him. She didn't even know he existed for the 170 years she was separated from the Cherokee tribe. So he he has a lot of depth to him because he made mistakes and has learned to live with them, but he is not a very well socialized person in the way of modern men have to be. He's lived too long and been that lone wolf cop for too long to be adequately socialized in dealing with a multi-paranormal, multi-racial, multi-species paranormal crime fighting group. So he is a delight to write. And then I think the next person that I would enjoy the most writing is Molly.
Ah, okay.
Molly,
Another fan favorite. Yeah.
Molly Everhart is a redheaded, hot-tempered witch married to a redheaded, not hot-tempered witch in the closet, because men who survive with the witch genes to adulthood are very few and far between. And the fact that a female witch and a male witch, who are called sorcerers, have married and had children, makes their children, if it were known that Evan was a witch, it would make their children of great interest to far too many people who would want to exploit the children's gifts. So Molly is sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. She needs Evan to use his magic quite often, but she can't have him use it in public.
Right.
It places their children in danger. So she is this very aggressively emotional but stubborn, thoughtful, kind woman who is as protective as a mama bear of her cubs. And when she gets with Jane, she is pulled into, she doesn't have to be pulled into the antics, but there's this part of her that really is excitement driven.
Right. She enjoys it. Yeah.
Yes, she does. So it's that part of her that's fighting the mama bear part of her. And internally, she's always being pulled in 2 different or 4 different directions. So she is a lot of fun to write. And then my last one would be Leo Pellissier, who, of course, spoilers, sorry folks.
Yeah, if you had plug your ears, if you haven't read through the whole series.
He suffered a very difficult accident.
Yes, let's put it that way. Yeah. Yeah.
So he is no longer with us, and we will. I miss him because he is so. Again, it's the depth. He is not a character I could write a book about because he does use and abuse people. And I at one point in a flashback in book, I think it's book 14, I think True Dead is the one it's in, he tells Jane that, did you know they used to call me the monster of New Orleans?
Well, and one of the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think about Leo is mercurial. Just that because one minute he's one thing and then the next he's something. And I guess you get to where he is by, making that work for you. And I want to say right here and now that I think that your comment about Molly, that emotionally aggressive is now my favorite phrase of the day. So that may turn up again. So we'll see. You'll be on a future panel with me, like 4 years from now, and I'll be, well, so who else? No.
Well, I'll just tell you, she's probably more like me than any of the other characters I've ever written. Um,
Oh, okay.
She has a big mouth and a hot temper. She doesn't always think before she speaks. She's extraordinarily protective of family and the people around her, and willing to go to bat for the underdog and suffer the consequences for it. And all of those things, and that character are very much like me. Now, I never had red hair, but I figured it's because God decided I had enough redhead going for me already. He really didn't need to bang the nail on the head and make me redheaded too.
Make you easily identifiable by giving you.
Yeah. I should be secret. People should have to get to know me a little bit before they go, oh dear.
Well, but that's interesting. That you feel as though Molly is more. There's more of you in Molly than in any of your other characters.
That's a good way to say it. Molly is. I dumped a lot of my flaws and strengths into Molly, more so than any other character.
You dumped them. I see. Okay.
I dumped them.
Now, from your perspective, who do you think were the most dangerous adversaries that both Jane and Nell have faced so far within their story?
Jane. All right, in Jane, there were two. There was Lucas Vasquez de Alion, who was a real historical figure, a Spanish conquistador who took over room in the Carolinas and was the first European to import African slaves. He was a real person, and I made him a bad guy, and he was a really bad guy. And he was dangerous. And then the let's see, is that book out yet? No, wait a minute. Okay, The Flayer of Mithrans was a very dangerous person because because he came after Jane specifically. He made it a point to attack Jane. All of the previous people that Jane was fighting were on behalf of the vampires in order to protect the witches who were her friends. The witches were her friends, which is why she was working with the vampires in the first place, ended up working with the vampires in the first place, was to protect her friends. But this guy came over from Europe and went after Jane personally. She had some things he wanted and a position he wanted, and he was going to get it. So I think he was very dangerous. He had mutated significantly by dark magic, and so he was a dangerous fellow. And I was very happy when I killed him off.
So were we all.
For now, it would be less the bad guys that she's chasing, because she has a team around her from the beginning and has the protection of the team from the beginning, but she also ends up with the protection of the church as someone who is outside of the church, and yet her family is still protecting her. So she's much more protected in a lot of ways from the beginning than Jane was. The moment that Jane met Nell, that was a big turning point in Nell's life. And having Rick and Paka come in and pull her out of herself and out of the dangerous corner she'd painted herself into, and give Nell a purpose and another protection system that she didn't have. That gave Nell advantages that Jane did not have. Jane had to build a team and a family around herself. So, in all honesty, the most dangerous thing that Nell has faced is Ernest, who, where do I go with this? Ernest is a not human creature buried in the earth, trapped. And I think that his ongoing malevolence against Nell's earth energy. He's a dark spirit trapped in the earth, but by the time he is you truly know what he is. And I think that what he did and how he constantly interfered, even after he was gone, with Nell.
Right.
I think that made him the best kind of antagonist because it forced Nell to develop and grow her magic. She was forced to learn how to fight something brand new, something she had to fight on her own because she's the only one of her kind that anyone knows about when the series starts. So Ernest is my favorite bad guy.
Okay. Well, he's certainly qualified, that's for sure. What would you say that if you putting Jane and Nell side by side, metaphorically, I suppose, what would you say are their major differences, and in what ways are they most alike?
Jane tends to strike out first. She doesn't tend to stand back and have to use defensive weapons. She is much more the hit first, ask questions later. Nell is more the let me observe and figure out how I can make you go away or how I can make you disappear, which is a whole different ballgame. She fights very differently and maybe a lot more dirty than Jane does in some ways, because Nell is not in your face aggressive. For the most part, Nell is that's the big difference. Nell is Nell. Nell's different. Nell is stable and steady and determined and implacable. And Jane is fiery and aggressive and offensive and doesn't mind pulling a weapon on one of her bad guys. Of course, her bad guys have fangs and teeth and suck people's blood. So, there's
right.
for that. And Nell's characters are more in the distance because being working with a police type organization means that as an investigator, she uses different tools entirely, and she is bound by she's bound by the law. Jane is not, because Jane's not a cop.
Right.
So really, that is at essence, Jane's a cop. I mean, Jane's not a cop, Nell's a cop. Jane's aggressive, in your face, cut off your head first, think about, I should have asked questions later. And Nell is how do I get this bad guy in jail or in some sort of place where he can't hurt people again? So Nell is a house cat with attitude, and Jane is a mountain lion with attitude.
Oh, there you go. It's perfect. Yeah.
They both kill things and eat them.
Right. But yeah, the one of them is a lot more inclined to do it without a lot of warning. So yes.
Yeah.
Now, and speaking of killing things, there's a lot more violence in the Yellowrock series than there is in Soulwood. And
Yes.
do you feel that this characteristic is more a reflection of the two characters, or is it more of the situations they find themselves in?
I think that it can't be an either or. I think it has to be a both. Jane would never have fit in with a law enforcement organization. She would have walked off and gone on her own. She is very, very much an ambush hunter. And that's what her beast refers to her as. A beast is best ambush hunter. And
Right.
Jane, she tracks down and destroys that which is killing humans, that paranormal creature that has lost its way and is killing humans. That's how she starts out, is to kill the unkillable.
Mm.
Human law enforcement doesn't do well against, even human law enforcement doesn't track down and just shoot people. But when Jane gets a contract, she goes after and kills. She's a bounty hunter. She has legal right to track down and destroy that which is killing humans or hurting humans in some way. And I forgot what the question was. I'm sorry.
Well, no, just that there's more violence in the Yellowrock series, and I mean, and as you've answered that quite well, actually. That the fact that what Jane's purpose is in the first place is to permanently stop. She's
Right.
supposed to be permanently stopping these creatures, and that means that she has lots of other people coming after her all the time.
Right.
Whereas in Nell's case, Nell's supposed to be stopping people,
Right.
not necessarily taking them out on her own.
Right.
So that,
and when Jane starts, there are no null rooms. When the series begins, well, there are null rooms, but nobody knows it because the witches don't share that. The witches create their own null rooms, and they put the dangerous witches, the witches who've killed humans or other witches, they put them into a null room and keep them quiet. And Jane doesn't know that. No one, it's not common knowledge when this starts. So there are no null rooms that the police use. There is no way to keep a vampire. How are you going to keep a vampire in prison with their dietary needs?
Right. Yeah, not a good mix.
And how do you keep a were creature in prison with their dietary needs and their violence and their the werewolves especially have a lack, in my world, have a lack of mental stability. So how do you keep them safely in a prison? How do you handle all of these different people? So, and when the series starts, Jane and people like her are the only way that there is to protect humans.
Yeah. The buck stops here with her.
With money. She gets paid for it. So that's
yeah, that's right. Yeah. Literally, she gets the bucks then they stop with her. If you could say that they could go anywhere, what other series world would you like to see Jane and or Nell go visit? If you was open to you to go, they could drop into a part of anybody else's world, who would it be?
Some years ago, Katie Murphy, C.E. Murphy, and I did a what's it called, where you do a mashup of a novella, and I had more fun doing that than I could even begin to tell you. And if contracts didn't keep that from happening, I would be right back there with Jane again.
So in the Walker series, right?
In the Walker series by C.E. Murphy, and that's exactly where I would be. I absolutely adore. I've gone blank. Joanne.
Yes.
Joanne. It is Joanne. Okay. I adore that character. I loved that character from the beginning, and I would absolutely love to be back with that character. It would just back in that conjoined world that Katie and I created. I think that would be so much fun. I think Nell would be hard to put in with anybody else's series. Nell is the the world that I've created for her requires for her to stay on her farm.
True.
She can't go anywhere for extended periods, only for short term. So I don't think that Nell would do well in another series, but you know who would be Rick LaFleur.
Oh, that's true. Now Rick could go.
Rick could go into a lot of different places. And without naming any without naming any other characters, I would love to see Rick in. You know what? I'm not allowed to say that. So I'm going to shut my mouth.
Well, we'll just leave it at that. That Rick should be welcomed in many places. So
I would love for Rick to have a chance to play in other people's worlds, because so far, and here's the real reason why. So far, Rick does not have a very happy romantic life.
True. Poor guy.
I feel like he's grown so much and changed so much and suffered so much. I would love for him to find somebody, but it hasn't worked out.
No, I know. Maybe he needs to go visit a different series so that he can.
Hey, that's what I'm thinking. He needs to go visit somebody, and so he can find somebody over there. Maybe that would work. He's just this lonely. What is he? A leopard? Were-leopard. Yeah, he's a lonely were-leopard.
Yes. With stark white hair now, which I find very intriguing. So, yeah. Now, we talked a little bit, you gave us kind of the rundown on Junkyard Cats and how you made that move and how this, how the whole thing basically just occurred to you when you were asked to come up with something a little bit different. And do you see yourself wanting to do a bit more sci-fi? I mean, the Rogue Mage series is has elements of sci-fi anyway.
Right.
So do you feel as though aside from the Junkyard Cat series, do you see yourself playing with more sci-fi in the future, or not playing with it, working with it?
I knew what you meant, and that's exactly how I feel. No, when I dive into something that's not a series, I feel like I'm playing. I'm just having fun. I've got there's Junkyard Cats, Junkyard Bargain, which just came out as an audible original. It will come out as not in paper, excuse me, as an e-novella this fall.
Oh, okay.
Junkyard War, I have to, in May, I will be sitting down and doing an outline to present to my agent and my editor at Audible Originals. And then I'll probably be finished with the Shining Smith story. So after that, yes, I mean, I have about 4 short stories and a novella before I can play again. And by play, I mean exactly what you said, dive into something new and see what I can come up with. And yes, the short answer is yes, I want to do that. The long answer is, will I find a world that works? And I do that by playing with short stories. So I'll come up with a short story with a new world and a new idea. And if it works, that's great. If it doesn't, I'm not going to worry about it. I'll leave it as a short story and I'll write another short story and I'll find something else about some other world. So
there you go. Yeah.
I have my contract is limited at this point. I have book 15 in the Jane Yellowrock series to finish writing and book 6 in the Soulwood series to write. I haven't even outlined it yet. And the novella I was talking about for Junkyard War. And really, that's it. That's my contract list right now, except for the short story. Well, I am doing the short stories for Dirty Deeds too, but they're just kind of, they're very different. They're not going to be series related. So I want to, I plan to. Life really throws you.
Yes, it does.
Wrenches right to the head. So I don't want to say, yes, I'm going to do that. And then, a year later, a fan say, you said you were going to do such and such. And so I don't really,
You can't, yeah.
yeah, I can't do that. Life is too mean,
Right.
too difficult to make promises. So
we'll just say that, yes, you would like to, but it all depends upon circumstance and all of that. So
yes, yeah. Short answer, yes. Long answer, no.
long or yeah,
Long
who
answer,
knows?
maybe. Long answer,
Right,
maybe.
maybe. There you go.
Yeah.
There you
Okay.
go. Now, my next question is has kind of two parts to it. Was there any of your books, whether it's part of your most recent series or one from longer ago, that you particularly struggled with? And do you have do you have a favorite from any of your books that you either, and by favorite, I know that's really hard to say, but is it one that you're particularly proud of, or that you just were satisfied with, or that it was pure joy from one moment to the next in the writing of it? And I will leave that.
Ashes to Ashes, which I wrote as Gwen Hunter, and which was a sort of a 2-book spinoff from the Ray Lynch series, was the first book in that series, that little mini series. It was really, really hard. It took me a year and a half.
Wow.
Novel. It won awards and did really, really well. And it is still a lot of people's absolute most favorite book. I have people still come up to me and say, I love Ashley Davenport. When are you going to write more Ashley books? And I can't. There's not enough life. There's not enough years in me to write all the books I want to write. But it took forever. It was really, really hard. And my agent at the time, who was a thriller agent, that's what he did. He worked with mystery and thriller predominantly. He and I spent hours on the phone trying to brainstorm and figure out what was wrong with the book. And I rewrote it. I wrote it and halfway through stopped and rewrote that, and halfway through stopped and rewrote that, and went back and wrote the next third. It was horrible. It was an absolute nightmare to write.
Hey.
And I was also going through some sort of an inflammatory condition at the time. And so my hands were swollen and really bad. I was allergic to corn and didn't know it. And so I was severely inflamed. I couldn't even hold a pencil. So I could only, here's how I could write. Let's see, like this. I couldn't type. And that novel was written in longhand.
Jeez.
A pad, and the writing was so bad because I couldn't hold the pencil correctly that I had to go back and read everything I wrote into a recorder. And then I had someone take the recorder and my words and type it into a word processing system for me. Now,
Yeah.
Back when there was word it was
right.
A glimmer in somebody's eye. It was the most difficult book I wrote. Now, after that, I discovered what was causing the inflammation. I was slowly able to begin getting corn out of my system. And, I do fine now.
Yay!
But that was physically and emotionally a really, really difficult book to write. A book that I loved writing the most would probably be Bloodstone.
Okay.
As Gwen, because Bloodstone Bloodstone actually was written, and when I was halfway through, I realized it was going to be in a different genre. And I knew that publisher wasn't interested in it. So I had to rewrite I wasn't halfway through. I think it was the first 2 or 3 chapters I rewrote, took all the paranormal stuff out, and wrote a much less paranormal sort of a psychic type thing, as opposed to post-apocalyptic magic, um, which became Blood Ring. But it was Bloodstone, and it was once I figured out what it was so much fun to write, because I knew I was going to get Blood Ring out of the whole concept of
Oh, gotcha.
a magic user in a jewelry shop, right?
Right.
There's this nugget of a concept over here that's a thriller, and then there's this bigger nugget, I guess, small boulder over here, that is a 3-book series, post-apocalyptic, that was going to take me to the next level in my career, and it did. So I really enjoyed the writing of Bloodstone, because I knew it was leading me into something else. And of course, after that came the concept of a Cherokee skinwalker biker chick who kills rogue vampires for a living. My future was set.
There you go.
Uh,
No, that's great though. That's really interesting that the progression worked out that way, and that you can actually pinpoint it
yeah.
and be able to see it. And that's great. I mean, that's just a lot of fun. Now, most authors have some of the people that they've enjoyed reading over the years. You mentioned Anne McCaffrey when you were younger, but who would you say have been maybe some of the most influential writers for you?
Well, we'd have to go back to writers that set me on my course, which would be Le Carré. I guess that's how it's pronounced. I've heard people pronounce it other ways.
Right.
I don't really know. Trevanian, his Shibumi. Trevanian was the author. Shibumi was the book. Really taught me a lot about character development. Somewhere, unless I gave it away, and I may have, but somewhere in this house, there is a hardback copy with all of my notes in various colored pens and pencils out to the side that I used to teach me how to do character development.
Ah.
That was very important. I enjoyed the early Sue Grafton, which, because her crime solving was very linear and very easy to follow and break down, and learn how to present crimes in a way that the reader may not see who the bad guy is. So most of the work that made the biggest impression on me was not in the fantasy or science fiction field. Most of the work that made the biggest impression on me as a writer were the thrillers. And
well, I get that. I would understand that could be the case, simply because of, as you were talking about, the plotting, because that all has to make sense.
right.
Spence.
I knew I could write. I knew I could write from an early age. I knew that the words could flow. They didn't always, but I knew that they could. And I knew that I could get inside a character's head, and I had a gift for character voice, which was better than a lot of the things I was reading. But what I didn't know how to do was to structure. And those people taught me how to structure. And then what I didn't learn from other writers, I learned from Gary Levely, who had just the cop's brain for structure, for crime solving.
Mm-hmm.
It was just laid out when we would write. He was excellent at that. But the other stuff was mine. That was, God's gift to me, was to be able to write, and to write with voice. changing my authorial voice and the authorial style, and for each type of novel, each so that when you pick up a Jane Yellowrock novel, you know right away it's not a Nell novel, and it's not a Shining Smith novel. It's a Jane novel, and
Exactly.
my voice changes. My author's voice changes, and that's something that I don't think can be taught. I think that's something that writers are born with, is the ability to change our syntax and our punctuation and our paragraphs and our word choice, so
Right.
that this series distinctly stands on its own over here, and this series is here and stands on its own, and this series is here and stands on its own, and yet there's enough Faith Hunter in them, or Gwen Hunter, that you can read them all and like all of them if you like the voice. If you like the voice in one, you're probably going to like the voice in the other. That said, the voice in the Rogue Mage series is the most distinct voice I've ever written in. The authorial voice in that one, the author voice in that series is totally different from any author voice I have ever used before or will ever use again.
Okay. Interesting. Now, see, anybody who is watching this and hasn't read the Rogue Mage, they're going to be heading out to go pick that up, and they might even decide whether they will get in touch with you and say if they agree with you or not. So um, that's interesting, and I mean I agree with you that I think that's important to be able to do that, to change to have the voice be different depending on what series you're doing, and I'm so yes, you do. And now, when another kind of craft question, I guess you could call it, um, do you, when you're actually writing, do you prefer, like, do you want absolute quiet, or do you like a little bit of background noise? You know, whether it's music or just something going on in the background.
Total silence.
Okay.
Total silence. I do not listen to music. I make sure that my surroundings are very peaceful and very calm, and I don't like wallpaper because it makes my brain activate. When I'm writing, I want as clean and clear a sensory palette around me as I can get.
Gotcha. Well, that makes sense. Now, for my very last question, you don't have to give me specifics if you don't want to, but what does your pleasure reading consist of? What kinds of things do you like to read just for fun?
I should have my Kindle here so I could tell you what I'm reading right now. I like the stuff that I write. I like urban fantasy. I like um, uh, I like something that's in my genre but isn't my voice.
Gotcha.
Right now, I'm reading an Alyssa Day novel,
Okay.
and it's essentially it's a redneck book, and I'm loving it. It's fabulous. It's about this, and I don't even know where it's going. I just got started in it, but the voice is fabulous, and it's about, I can't remember the title, but it's about a woman who the main character, when she touches someone, she sees the moment of their death, and it usually drives her to her knees, and it's very hard to get over. So she makes it a point to never, ever touch anyone. And she is the half owner of a pawn shop.
Oh
And
boy. Yeah.
having so much fun with this book. And then let's see, who was I reading before that? Love Eileen Wilkes, Devon Monk. I do bad with names. RJ Blaine writes under a bunch of different names, and when I need a palate cleanser, I have read some of her what does she call them? Something with a body count. Uh,
Is it magic with a body count?
Magic with a body count, or mysteries with a body count, or it's R.J. Blaine, and I have read. One day I just got 5 of hers and sat down and just binge read, because it was such a good palate cleanser for me, and I was able to just slide through and get out of my own writer's head for a while. So I want to stay in things that are similar enough to what I write, but not so similar that I pick up on voice or character, or inadvertently start writing the way they write, or inadvertently start writing something that they wrote.
Right, right. Yeah, you don't want that.
Yeah, I'm very careful to not read some writers, because I don't want to pick up their way of writing. Patricia Briggs, I'm very careful to read her books when I'm not writing one of mine.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I don't want to steal from her. I don't want to, I mean, she writes about a character who's a walker, so I have to be very careful. Even the Urban Shaman books by C.E. Murphy, I had to read separate from when I was writing the Jane books. So I'm good about pre-ordering and then not reading until it's convenient to me to read someone's work. And then if I do need that break, I really have to be careful not to read books about vampire hunters.
Oh yeah, I bet. Yeah. Especially when you're, as you said, you're in the middle of writing your own. So it might be different if you're already done or whatever. So yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. I know I've heard some people say that they like to read outside of their genre, but for the most part, most people do kind of the same, they have the same sort of approach you do, that they enjoy reading more of, in their
romantic comedy with a body count.
Oh, that's okay.
That's the RJ. And see, that's why I can read her books, because the romantic comedy with a body count it's not urban fantasy. It's not what I write. So I do read a lot of romantic comedy and things that are funny, things that are outside my genre. But again, it comes down to voice. If the voice isn't right, I don't read it. If the voice is pedantic or teaching or condemning of someone, race, religion, whatever, I am very careful to put that one away and not come back to it. It's not that I necessarily read with a social agenda. I don't. But I am very careful not to get taken down some other writers' social agenda, if that makes sense. There's a mystery writer I used to read a lot who in her later books began to severely put down believers in Christianity and make fun of them. Mm-hmm. And although I loved her writing and I loved her storytelling and I loved her characters and she was really good, I quit reading her because she was making fun of other people. And so that is one caveat. I do not read people's work when they make fun of or condemn people who are obviously different from them.
Well, that's a good rule of thumb. I mean, that probably helps your pleasure reading stay pleasurable for one thing, instead of getting you upset, right?
It does.
Well, Faith, I just can't thank you enough for having been here today with me. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I know that everyone who watches this will enjoy seeing you on the screen, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And it's been wonderful to see you, of course, even if it
Thank you.
is from a distance.
I know this is about what we have right now, but
That's right. That's right. If that's the best we can do, that's what we do, right?
right. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you asking good questions that made me do a lot of thinking. I'm sorry I hemmed and hawed and had to go down rabbit holes a little bit, but it was wonderful. And it was so good seeing you again until we can see one another in person, whether it's this year, which I hope, or next. So hug, hug.
Well, yes, more virtual hug. Thank you so much. And to anybody watching this, thank you for tuning in. And if you subscribe to our channel, if you've not done so before, you will get announcements when things get posted. And you may find some others that you are interested in. For Supernatural, the show, Supernatural, for your fans of that, we have our season 3 panel coming up on the 29th, which is a part of our Supernatural Rewind series. We go over, we started back at the beginning, and we've got season 3 this month. Next month's author interview will be with Melissa F. Olson, and those details will be posted later. Again, many thanks to Faith. We'll give you a hand for being here.
Thank you.
And
I'll give you my con wave.
oh, there you go. There you go. And
Live long and prosper.
Yeah. Yeah, we hope, right? And we do look forward to seeing anyone who is our usual con goer. We hope that we will see you in person this year. If not, then sometime soon. So again, thank you, Faith, for being here. Thank everybody for watching. And stay tuned to the Facebook page for announcements on anything to do with our virtual programming or coming up for the programming in person this year. So thanks very much, all, and goodbye.